You were never made to blend in. Your fingerprints don't match another soul in history. Yet, somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that different meant defective, that being too intense was a curse, that dreaming too loudly was childish. But what if I told you the very things they criticized are clues to your calling? Let's get one thing straight. You're not broken. You're built differently. And sometimes, the world doesn't know how to handle what it doesn't understand. You carry energy some can't interpret. You walk into a room and shift the atmosphere. You ask the questions that make others uncomfortable. You feel things deeply because you were born to heal, not to hide. That level of depth, that isn't a flaw, it's coding, divine coding. Your DNA was never meant to be ordinary. It's been encrypted with purpose. From childhood, many people with exceptional traits are misunderstood, not because they are flawed, but because their uniqueness does not conform to societal expectations. The world tends to categorize people based on patterns it already recognizes. When someone operates outside of those patterns, whether through emotional intensity, intellectual sharpness, or unconventional behavior, others often respond with discomfort or confusion. This discomfort leads to mislabeling. Terms like too sensitive, too much, or unpredictable are used to describe individuals whose presence challenges the emotional or intellectual complacency of those around them. But in truth, these labels reflect not a defect in the individual, but a limitation in the observer's understanding. Educational systems, workplaces, and even family units often reward conformity more than creativity or self-awareness. A student who asks too many questions may be viewed as disruptive rather than curious. A child who reacts emotionally to injustice might be seen as difficult rather than empathetic. Adults who carry visionary ideas or strong internal convictions are often marginalized because they do not blend in with dominant cultural or social norms. In these spaces, those with extraordinary mental wiring are urged to adjust, to adapt, and eventually to suppress the very parts of themselves that make them different, thereby sabotaging their originality in exchange for superficial acceptance. Uniqueness is often threatening because it exposes what is average or unexamined. People who walk in deep purpose naturally disrupt environments built on surface-level values. Their mere existence forces a reflection in others, one that may uncover apathy, unresolved trauma, or lack of direction. Because of this, unique individuals are frequently misunderstood, not due to their shortcomings, but due to their capacity to reveal what others are trying to avoid. This isn't arrogance or superiority. It's an unintentional mirror. When your presence reveals someone else's stagnation, they may choose to distance themselves rather than grow. This misunderstanding can also be internalized. When you are repeatedly told that your instincts are wrong, your emotions are exaggerated, or your thinking is unrealistic, you begin to doubt your own design. This is how brilliant people are taught to hide. They silence their voices in meetings. They withhold their insights in relationships. They dull their shine to avoid rejection. But the problem isn't with them, it's with the fact that the world has created very narrow lanes for acceptable behavior, and anything outside of those lanes is questioned instead of cultivated. It is crucial to recognize that misunderstanding is not a reliable indicator of worth. In fact, being misunderstood often signals the presence of rare internal wiring. Historically, many of the most innovative, transformative, and spiritually gifted people were outcasts at some point in their lives. Their capacity to feel deeply, think differently, or envision future possibilities didn't make sense to those around them. But their impact wasn't lessened by that misunderstanding, it was sharpened by it. Resistance built their clarity. Rejection made them resilient. Isolation helped them hear what the noise of approval often drowns out, their authentic inner voice. From a psychological standpoint, what appears as instability may in fact be emotional depth. Sensory sensitivity, strong intuition, and spiritual awareness are traits frequently overlooked in traditional personality assessments. These traits can mimic symptoms of emotional dysregulation when viewed through the wrong lens. But in reality, they may indicate a highly tuned nervous system that is deeply responsive to the environment, which, when nurtured properly, becomes an asset, not a liability. Misunderstanding emerges when people attempt to explain the complex through a simplistic framework. The truth is, the language people use to describe you often reflects more about them than about you. People who value control may call your freedom reckless. Those who prioritize comfort may label your truth disruptive, and those who lack purpose may call your passion obsessive. This linguistic misalignment is not a sign to edit it yourself. It's a sign to discern the limits of your current environment. Not everyone has the vocabulary or vision to appreciate what you carry. That doesn't mean what you carry is invalid. In educational terms, this is the equivalent of placing a gifted child in a standardized testing system. The child may fail the test, not because they lack intelligence, but because the system isn't designed to measure their kind of brilliance. Similarly, many people move through life failing systems that were never calibrated to recognize their value. The solution is not to conform to the system, but to outgrow it intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally. To embrace one's unique design is not to claim superiority, but to claim truth. And the truth is, you were never ordinary. Your wiring was never built to operate on autopilot. You were engineered with emotional, spiritual, and cognitive complexities that make standard categories insufficient. The misunderstanding you faced is not evidence of failure. It is, in many cases, the highest form of confirmation that you were created to stand out, intentionally, powerfully, and unapologetically. Being misjudged is not always a reflection of personal error. It is often a direct consequence of operating at a level others have not yet understood. Throughout history, those with significant callings have frequently been misunderstood, criticized, or rejected, not because they were wrong, but because they were ahead of their time. The pattern is familiar. When someone operates with heightened clarity, deep conviction, or unusual insight, they tend to unsettle systems and people bound to conventional thinking. This unsettling presence is not a sign of trouble. It is a sign of transition. You are not being rejected because you are off course. Often, you are being resisted because you are aligned with a deeper calling. A calling will rarely make sense to everyone around you. When someone is positioned to do something extraordinary, they will often experience environments that cannot support or interpret their purpose. This is because a calling requires separation before manifestation. People are usually placed in isolation, not as punishment, but as preparation. Misjudgment serves a divine function. It clears out the noise of external opinions so the individual can tune into the frequency of their inner purpose. That disconnection from common approval is what strengthens personal identity. In this context, being misunderstood is not a deficit. It is a design. It creates space for clarity that crowds cannot provide. Social validation is one of the most addictive forms of security, and when that is withdrawn, when people distance themselves, question your motives, or misinterpret your actions, it creates internal pressure. That pressure, though uncomfortable, is what strengthens discernment. Misjudgment forces you to evaluate the source of your confidence. Are you rooted in approval, or are you grounded in purpose? The deeper the calling, the less you can rely on others to affirm it. Not everyone can understand where you're headed because not everyone was given access to your blueprint. This dynamic often plays out in spiritual narratives. Biblical figures such as Joseph, David, Moses, and even Jesus were all misjudged by their communities, their families, or their followers. What made them distinct was not their perfection, but their unshakable clarity about who they were and what they were sent to do. That clarity did not come from applause. It came through conflict, misunderstanding, and rejection. These were not detours from their calling. They were confirmations. Misjudgment was not a warning sign to stop. It was a signal that they were carrying something unfamiliar, something that would only be understood after the fruit of their labor had fully matured. From a psychological perspective, This process can be distressing. Human beings are wired for connection. Rejection activates the same neurological pathways as physical pain. However, in the context of a calling, emotional discomfort is sometimes necessary to break the habit of dependence on consensus. People who are called to influence or lead must first learn to stand alone. This period of aloneness is not abandonment, it is alignment. It realigns the person with their internal compass rather than external approval. One of the greatest misconceptions is that clarity will lead to instant recognition. In reality, clarity often leads to opposition. The moment you begin to walk in your true assignment, it disrupts the comfort of those who have benefited from your confusion. Misjudgment becomes a tool of refinement. It teaches emotional independence, develops spiritual sensitivity, and forces internal integrity. In short, it makes you unshakable. Because once you've been misjudged, and you've continued to walk in purpose anyway, you no longer require validation to keep moving forward. There's also a theological dimension to this. Many times, God will allow you to be misjudged so He can separate you from people who cannot carry the weight of your assignment. Not everyone is meant to go where you are going. Misjudgment causes detachment, and detachment creates room for divine redirection. God uses misunderstanding as a pruning tool, not to harm, but to make room for fruit. People who misunderstand you may not be against you. They simply weren't assigned to understand you. That's not your burden to fix. Your only job is to remain faithful to what you know you're called to do. Misjudgment is also a mirror. It shows you how much you've internalized the need to be seen a certain way. When your intentions are questioned, when your character is misrepresented, when your name is spoken in rooms you've never entered, you are being stretched to value truth over perception. That is spiritual maturity, to remain rooted in purpose even when misunderstood. To stay kind, clear, and focused when misrepresented. This discipline isn't easy, but it is essential. Ultimately, the discomfort of being misjudged is temporary, but the fruit of staying faithful to your calling is eternal. The silence, the distancing, the questioning, none of it is wasted. It sharpens your hearing, clarifies your direction, and strengthens your trust in a higher plan. Misjudgment is not a failure. It is often the evidence that you are on the right path, heading in a direction others haven't yet seen, but someday will. The phrase "too much" is one of the most common weapons used against those whose presence challenges the ordinary. When someone is too emotional, too passionate, too driven, or too intense, what's often happening is not that the person is doing something wrong, but that their depth confronts others' comfort zones. The accusation of too much is less about excess and more about incompatibility. People who feel overwhelmed by your intensity often haven't done the inner work to hold that kind of energy. It's easier to label someone as extreme than to admit they make you feel inadequate, intimidated, or exposed. This societal tendency to shrink what it doesn't understand is rooted in fear. Unfamiliarity creates discomfort. When someone expresses big vision, deep emotion, or powerful conviction, it disturbs spaces that are built on moderation and politeness. In truth, politeness is often used as a disguise for fear of disruption. Being too much simply means you're no longer manageable by the standards others use to regulate their own limited growth. What they call too ambitious may actually be courageous. What they name too sensitive might really be deeply aware. What's labeled too loud could be truth spoken without fear. These qualities are not negative. They are simply foreign to environments where playing small is rewarded. People tend to criticize what they can't categorize. When they don't have a mental file for your kind of presence, they judge it as unstable or inappropriate. But what if too much is actually exactly what's needed? Systems don't change through neutrality. Families don't heal through silence. Culture doesn't transform through passivity. The world has never been changed by those who were just enough, to blend in. It's the so-called too much people who raise questions, start movements, challenge injustices, and introduce new ways of thinking. They are often rejected before they are respected. Being too much is often a sign that you've outgrown the environment you're in. It's not about arrogance or superiority. It's about scale. You were built to carry vision, weight, and depth that small spaces cannot contain. People may try to downsize you not because you're wrong, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. They feel safe when you are manageable. But when your language changes, your standards rise, your vision expands. They're forced to confront their own unwillingness to grow. Instead of rising with you, some choose to resist you. That resistance is not a judgment. It's information. It tells you who has the capacity to walk with you in the next season and who doesn't. Emotionally, it can be painful to be told you are too much, especially when the criticism comes from people you love or once looked up to. Rejection can make you question your worth, your path, even your sanity. But here's the deeper truth. Your intensity is not a problem to fix, it's a fire to steward. You were wired to feel deeply so that you can lead from compassion. You were designed to think differently so that you can solve what others accept. Your spiritual, emotional, and mental volume was set high for a reason, because your assignment requires amplification, not apology. Psychologically, when people are labeled as too much, they often experience a type of self-abandonment. They start to self-monitor, self-edit, and shrink themselves in an attempt to fit into environments that were never designed to honor them. Over time, this results in anxiety, confusion, and burnout, not because the person is inherently unstable, but because they are violating their design in order to feel accepted. Long term, this creates internal conflict. The person knows they were made for more, but begins to internalize shame for expressing it. This contradiction weakens identity and suppresses power. What's needed is not less of you. It's the right environment. The right community will not require you to reduce yourself. They will not see your passion as a threat or your honesty as rudeness. They will understand that your intensity comes from a place of calling, not chaos. They will value your insights, respect your emotions, and make space for your voice. Until that environment is found, you must be willing to stand in your full self without apology. Not everyone will get it, but the right ones will. And they'll only find you if you're brave enough to stay visible, even in the face of being labeled too much. Spiritually, being too much is often a signal that you were created to carry things others weren't. God doesn't assign average capacity to extraordinary callings. The more weight you were built to carry, the more volume you'll need to express. Your emotional intensity, spiritual hunger, and mental depth are not personality quirks. They are signs of divine assignment. To suppress that is not humility. It's disobedience to your design. You are not here to be tolerated. You are here to be released. There are moments in life when everything appears to be falling apart. Plans collapse, doors close, relationships break, and what once felt secure becomes unstable. In these moments, it is easy to assume something is wrong or that you are off track. But often, divine intervention doesn't show up in convenience. It shows up in disruption. When certain doors close unexpectedly, it is not always the enemy at work. Sometimes it's protection in disguise. God often allows something to end because he sees what you cannot. What feels like loss in the moment may be preservation from long-term harm. Closed doors are not signs of rejection. They are signs of redirection. From a spiritual perspective, God does not waste moments. Every closed opportunity is either an answered prayer you forgot you prayed, or a preemptive response to a danger you never saw coming. There are situations we chase after that seem good on the surface, but are misaligned with our purpose. Whether it's a job, a relationship, or a dream, if God blocks it, it's not because he's being cruel. It's because he's being precise. Purpose is too important to be compromised by premature access. Often, we measure success by what opens for us. We celebrate open doors as signs of favor, but what if the closed ones are just as sacred? What if the opportunities that didn't call you back were divinely silenced to make room for something better? In Scripture and in life, God's patterns often include seasons of subtraction before increase. He removes what's familiar to make space for what's foundational. This process can feel confusing, even painful, but divine removal is one of the clearest indicators of divine involvement. When God is deeply involved in your life, He doesn't just bless what you want. He removes what could eventually become a burden. It is a mercy to be denied access to what would eventually derail you. Sometimes, we are too emotionally invested to let go of things ourselves. In such cases, God does the work for us, not to hurt us, but to make sure we're not settling beneath our design. What seems like a loss is really an act of love. Not every ending is a failure. Some endings are appointments for greater beginnings. Psychologically, we are wired to seek resolution. We want answers, closure, and certainty. When something ends without explanation or clarity, our minds go into overdrive trying to understand. But God's protection often bypasses human logic. He doesn't always explain what He's doing, because explanation is not always necessary for transformation. Some of the greatest spiritual growth happens in the dark, in the unknown, and in the aftermath of a divine no. Growth does not always look like forward movement. Sometimes it looks like standing still while the old systems fall away. Emotionally, it can be painful to let go of what we hoped for. Dreams that don't come to pass can leave residue, doubt, bitterness, and confusion. But maturity is learning to trust God not only when He says yes, but also when He says not now, or not that. Closed doors build trust. They deepen our dependence on divine timing rather than impulsive striving. When we are spared from something, we may not realize the full picture immediately, but over time, the wisdom becomes clear. If that had worked out, I wouldn't be where I am today. Relationally, people leaving your life or drifting away may seem like rejection. But relationships are assignments, and not all assignments are lifelong. Some people are aligned with you for a season, not a destiny. When they leave, it's not always betrayal. Sometimes it's release. God allows certain people to exit because they cannot contribute to the next stage of your evolution. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. Letting go of old attachments makes space for divine connections to emerge. You can't embrace what's ahead while holding tightly to what has expired. From a vocational or purpose-driven standpoint, even career changes and failed ventures serve a purpose. The path to your calling is rarely linear. Closed doors often reroute you toward hidden opportunities you never would have considered. The detour becomes the direction. Many people discover their true life's work not through success, but through failure. When one opportunity dries up, another one, aligned more deeply with your gifts and purpose, often follows. But it only becomes visible when you stop mourning what ended and start paying attention to what is emerging. Spiritually, every closed door is a test of trust. Will you still believe that God is good even when the outcome is unclear? Will you trust the designer more than your own design? Trust is not tested by answered prayers, it's tested by unanswered ones. When you don't get what you wanted, but you remain rooted in hope and faith, you prove to yourself and to heaven that your allegiance is not circumstantial. Closed doors are not dead ends. They are divine strategies to redirect you to what truly belongs to you.